Hi, good morning. I'm Oliver Gao. I'm the director of Cornell System Engineering Program. And as I said before, I've been very fortunate to conduct what I call these system conversations with the brilliant minds that we bring to Cornell. Today, I'm very honored and to introduce to you, Professor António Câmara. So António, he is a professor at NOVA University of Lisbon, Portugal. And he was a Fulbright Scholar at Cornell University in 1988 to 89. So welcome back to Cornell, António.
Pleasure.
And then he visited MIT from 1998 to 1999. He was really a pioneer in spatial data systems and also the virtual reality, which is now, with the computational advancement, it's playing such an important role in our daily life as well as advancing our society as well as our daily life. So António was a leading researcher behind the Portugal SNIG project, and I hope we will talk more about it later. And actually that project led to the development of EU's Inspire infrastructure. We all know that infrastructure is a big topic. And I think I'll just stop here with the introduction because we have a long list of António's achievement, which I hope that in our conversation we'll bring this up. So António, I see that, of course, right, I believe you were once also, was probably like a young PhD student or undergraduate student, and you did all your study, and after you finish your study and you shoot off and you start your career. Right, when you started, of course, when you were studying college, and you were probably focused on one area, but now look at what you have done, right? From being a professor to being an entrepreneur, and then being, leading these, startups and having this impact to the Fortune 500 companies, and also bring benefit to our society. So, António, I would like you to tell more about yourself. Kind of how your trajectory, develops, because the reason I'm asking this because, and I think all, Pete, I'm looking at Pete, we all say that before we were tenured, we were a specialist. We focused on a tiny thing. And after we were tenured, as our career developed, and we all become somehow, system engineers. So anyway, I stop here. Please, António, we'd love to learn more about you.
Well, first of all, it's a unique pleasure to be here, with you and Pete Logs, which has been an inspiration all my life. I mean, I don't know if everyone knows, but besides his accomplishments in water resources systems, he was, one of the first researchers in the world in interactive computer graphics. So. Actually, my life is very strange because I started by being a tennis player. I played for Portugal under 18 and under 20, and my dream was to be a professional tennis player. Uh-huh. So I played a little bit in the circuit, as a contemporary of Borg and Villas and so forth. I was not as talented. I got an injury, and I decided to come to the US. I went to Virginia Tech first. To civil engineering, but also systems engineering. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I designed software to optimize wastewater treatment plants. It was very, very, very different from what I do today. And then I went to Portugal, and and came back a little bit later to MIT for a postdoc. Also in systems, environmental systems, if you will. And my goal when I went to Portugal was I had this advisor at MIT that Pete knows very well called David Marks, and he told me, never go to Portugal. There is no critical mass. There is no information by osmosis. There is no ecosystem. There is nothing except good food. And I said, that's a good start, good food. And my goal was to reverse his opinions, was to create critical mass, was to help the students to become as good as they can. And I learned a lot while in the US, because I really think, when I was at MIT, some years later, one day they asked Negroponte, what is the difference between Europe and the US? because he was a Greek American, and he said something that I really think is simple and profound. We believe in the young, and so I followed that because I really believe in the young. So I think my most important contribution was, to help them to become as good as they can be. And I think it's the fundamental role of universities. The other thing I also follow a lot in life, and I really think it's a huge advantage of universities, is that we can fail.
Yeah.
I mean, we can risk and fail. This is a continuous laboratory of ideas. So it's great for me, even now, and as I'm an entrepreneur, university plays a very important role, because that's where, we can have students trying and hopefully getting it right. But if they fail, there are lessons too. Mm-hmm. So I really like all my life, university life, because of these two sides. It's a laboratory, it's an adventure, a controlled adventure, and at the same time, you are, creating great people, or helping to create great people.
I agree with you. You have all the freedom to go into an adventure, but with a safety net. Yeah. Right? It's kind of you have, if you fall and there's a safety net there, right? You lose not too much, and also failing early in life is always better than failing later.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So I think, António, I heard you kind of in your brief recounting of your career you mentioned, and I feel like I summarize two things. One is really, and I think you mentioned while your advisors at MIT did not advise you to go back to Portugal, but you went back because I think I heard two contributions. One is that you mentioned you believe in the young and you want to change the opinion, and you successfully did that. And also you mentioned it's kind of in the university, and while allowing the young to fail, actually you help educate and train the young generations back in Portugal to be really, as you said, you have successfully built, a mass of intellectuals back there, right?
So I was part of a generation that was blessed to become a part of the European Union because we got suddenly funding that we didn't have before. And we had a Secretary of State for the Environment that I think Pete met at one time, a very young guy named Carlos Pimenta was, I cannot say this publicly, but he was crazy, and said, one day I want the Portuguese to be at home and see the environmental impacts of all these roads we are going to build with the European Union. So he created a team, most of us who had studied in the US, like 4 people, to design a spatial data infrastructure that could be used by anyone. And we did, and the thing was that when I came to Cornell in 98, 99, I started looking what was happening. Right now, everyone thinks that video on computers is obvious, but at the time it was like a novelty. Virtual reality was like in the beginning, and we said, well, this is going to be virtual reality. So we created this virtual model of Portugal we could fly through. We had a World Fair in 1998, and every Portuguese could fly over this mosaic of aerial photos draping digital terrain models. And then, that infrastructure inspired the European Union to create the Inspire infrastructure. And I realized then, I think I can go to do this in a company. And it was very interesting because when we went to start the company, that project, which was fantastic, and it was going to give a huge transparency to every project in Portugal, was cancelled. So I started a company, and we were like engineers, environmental engineers, most of them. What do we do now? We are not going to get funding in environment. So we started developing location-based games, which was like similar. It's like a predator-prey model, but a little bit different. Everyone knows the Pokemon Go. I mean, we created like the Pokemon Go many years before, and there was a tender by BBC to do, the first mobile application, location-based model, with a show called Spooks, which is about MI5. Mm-hmm. So we did that, and I think that project had an impact, because it was totally new, and especially in Portugal, this was a Portuguese company. I mean, and these guys got this project, and of course, I had done that was part of the project on the World Fair. That people decided, well, this guy is sort of a change. I really think they gave me the prize not like this, like an accomplishment, but like a message. This guy is sort of someone that wants to change, But it became with a cost, because then, there's a very interesting analysis that was once done in Europe. I was part of lots of groups in Europe that realized why Europe was going backwards, and the US was progressing. Mm-hmm. And I was called by very, very different areas. And because I was in gaming, once I was called for why the movie industry in Europe is failing, as compared to the US. And there was someone that called, well, one of the major problems is that we don't have stars like the Americans do. And one of the reasons we don't have stars, we have, of course, very talented people, because to be a star is very demanding. It requires a lot of work.
Yeah.
And for me to win that prize was terrible. Not that I became a star, because I was interviewed all the time. Was a pain, So awards have this double. I mean, they are good, of course. Everyone wants to be recognized, but on the other hand, I became sort of a public figure, and that is not. I don't want to be a star, and I didn't want to be a star.
Yeah, I think the nation has a need, and you have what you can offer, right? And what you can offer combined what they need. I think that's a very good, of course, due to the work. So I'll probably dive a little bit into. So it's kind of Peter, I said kind of at least 3 careers. In first kind of professional tennis player, and then kind of a academic, a professor and a researcher, and then an entrepreneur, kind of they're doing a leading in this startup actually. So in your research career, as a professor, I want to just dive a little bit more into that, because I feel that basically laid the foundation for your later entrepreneurial career. And also second, I think it's really, it seemed to me, it also gave you a lot of sense of fulfillment, because I think one word, it just keeps coming up to me as you were saying things. The keyword is change. Seems like you have always been a change agent. Yeah. You are enabling all this change. First of all, so you went back to Portugal, and then you changed probably you as one of the important players helped change probably the education system, and then kind of build the critical mass. So can you tell us more about your research and academic career, and so kind of the reason again we want to ask this, because now you're back in Cornell, where in the academic environment, and we hope by listening to what your insights and your experience from your research academic life, hopefully, that will, when other people watch your video, they will be inspired.
Well, right in the beginning, and in my PhD dissertation, I was very much in network theory and network optimization. Mm-hmm. I was very much in, sort of all those problems of nonlinear optimization and so forth. But it was for a short period, because when I got to Portugal and I got into, in a major project, which was the environmental impact of a dam, which was the largest lake in Europe, and where I had to sort of scientifically manage 30 different areas, from the guys that studied the birds to the social impacts and so forth. So I realized that the different scientists used languages that were very different. There are some people that were very mathematically oriented, which was easy. And then you had the social sciences, which are just words, and lots of subjectivity. And then there were the more visual people, So I started thinking, well, and that was a sort of, right now it's called multimodal. You have pictures, words, and numbers. And at the time, we call it multidimensional. And so I started thinking, how do you simulate something where there are driving models, which are the traditional, but then there are people that basically write text, and others prefer to do videos and it's very funny because right now that's what large multimodal models do. The AI, what they do is what we did then, and then what I did, which was, looking back, it's kind of pathetic. First thing I did was sort of what it's called today a knowledge graph of combining everything. So my beginning was combining this thing comes from the network to pick up the different concepts and the relationships, with the fact that some of those relationships were linguistic, others pictorial, and others numeric. So that was one area where from several years I studied. But then when virtual reality came, I got to know Steve Feiner was a pioneer of augmented reality. Well, you overlay digital information on reality. And then a window opened to me because, and I really think that doesn't, is as taken as serious as it should. Because I realized that what augmented reality would enable is a completely different type of geography. It will enable a microgeography. You'll be able to georeference everything. So we start looking on the field of view, you have to know the coordinates of every point. What would happen if you have a real scene and you introduce a virtual element? You are watching a movie and suddenly, let's change. You have a predator-prey movie. Let's change. Now let's have other predators and preys. And that starts touching on what is the video gaming and so forth. But from a research standpoint, what we were very strong were on these microgeographic aspects, which led to a patent on indoor location, for instance, that then was later bought by Uber, and several patents that were referenced by every company. So that's a second area of research. And that area was actually at a very unexpected application, which was in soccer, in football. Because we work with a major coach from Portugal and our major player, Ronaldo, and we start looking on how these ideas of microgeography applies to football. And there was a major problem at the time. I mean, right now we have 600 cameras and AI and all the models, and you know exactly what the player does. But it was like 20 years ago. We didn't have that. And one of the problems was to recognize the location of the players in real time. Because they all alike. It was very difficult to do it. And I remember the coach was very nervous about it because we didn't do a good job. So I had an idea, which was, what about if we paint with invisible inks the shirts and we use infrared cameras, because then you could, identify the players much better. So this was in practice was fantastic. But then when we went to go into the stadium, suddenly it didn't work, and then we realized infrared cameras only have a 50-meter range, and it doesn't work in stadiums. So I said, well, someone will find that problem. But I became interested in a different point, which was the inks. So I worked with a great friend of mine, Fernando Pina, who was also a visiting professor at MIT. He was a guy that his work led he didn't work lab, but he was part of 3 Nobel Prizes in chemistry, a great guy. And I said, if you can do these kind of inks, can you do others? Let's imagine, you had ink that I met at MIT, the previous work, which was based on autophoretic chemistry. Mm-hmm. What about if we can print the inks and they change color? So I'm not a chemist, but I start looking to printed electronics, which is like a completely different field mm-hmm. where I didn't know anything. But I could imagine the applications for printing displays that were very inexpensive and that were very low cost, and that in the end became a company that is listed now, and it's called Invisible, that also works for many companies. So I start, that's another field of print electronics. So in the last few years, I decided to do research come back to the beginning, to the environmental area and so forth. So I was called by an association of farmers in Portugal to look what can we do for farmers from a technological standpoint. Of course, there are people in agronomy that do it, but somehow they ask me, what have you have ideas for farmers? And I realized that was true, but they need more money, okay? They need more layers of revenue. So I started looking to the nature markets. Mm-hmm. Carbon, if you have a piece of land and you do something good, either in terms of removing carbon or increasing biodiversity, you should be compensated.
Yes.
So I went into this area of carbon credits and biodiversity credits, not at the credits themselves, because there are entities that certify and trade them, but what would be the work that would be necessary for any farmer to gain money from his property by doing certain practices without that much effort. Mm-hmm. So that's when I started to think, well, these are starting to be automated. There are lots of challenges. You have to, of course, to collect information. You have to go to all these steps, and basically, like 3 years ago, I realized, well, now we are going to have the tools that will enable to automate that, and that is through the development of agents that combine the traditional models that we always used, the traditional remote sensing information that we always used, but also the knowledge that is in the large models, or they can be in the large models, mm-hmm. plus augmented reality and virtual reality. So if you combine all of this, you can develop agents, that basically follow, you instruct the agent to do it, and the agent instructs different components, orchestrates, mm-hmm. in the end, that the farmer in the end receives money for his piece of land and understands why. And I realized that there was a researcher at MIT, Nadina, that had come up with the name of Internet of Nature. She was doing something in the urban context, and I thought, well, that's a nice name. I've not met her yet. She doesn't know, but I want to invite her to go to Portugal. But I thought, well, that's a very good name. It's an umbrella name. Mm-hmm. And I really think that what we can do for farmers, we can do to, not only for carbon credits, but we can do to precision agriculture. Mm-hmm. We can do to the water. So we start working with a water company in Portugal. What can we do in the Internet of Nature for water? What we can do, for every field in the environment and nature. I realized that in the end, and that's my vision, mm-hmm. there'll be agents, okay? And in those agents, they are the sort of the technology stand, but there is the domain knowledge, and they have all to be orchestrated and integrated. And, and then, changing with Pete, I said, I'm going to the US, and I think the best place in the world to develop the Internet of Nature is Cornell. You have everything. You have the environmental part, you have the agriculture, you have the ecology. I mean, this is the top place, and people interact with different technologies. So, I'll be very, very glad to talk about my ideas and to be a starting discussion. Since then, I convinced people in Portugal to support that idea and to advance and to organize meetings. So one of the results of my visit is to invite you to come to Portugal and discuss how we can do this together. Because I really think it will happen, and I really think it will be really, really important for everyone involved, and for humans and for nature. Also, in the middle of all these, I also realized that beyond the software part, I think the hardware part will be very important. For instance, when we looked to what's happening in the water industry, there are malfunctions in water treatment or wastewater or in every phase of the water cycle. And right now you have people there looking or smelling and, using the human senses, which is fine. Mm-hmm. But it's not fine that they have to stay awake at like 3 a.m. And, so we realize, okay, we really think some of these functions can be replaced by sensors, processors, and actuators, that we can program. So I really think there will be lots of devices that will come, hardware devices that will come from the Internet of Nature in almost any area, because we need data. We need to collect data. We need to process, and we have to actuate. But anyway, it's a long
what about
answer.
Urban transportation?
Well, that's another area. So it's a totally different area. So I was involved many years ago in a theme park in Portugal, and I met this architect. And one day he knocked at my door, and I said, hey, this was like 6-7 years ago. António, I have this crazy idea. I want to do the smallest, he didn't call car, vehicle in the world. So this is like a 3-wheeler, size of a motorcycle, very robust, very comfortable, fast. But so do you want to get in? And I said, why not? Of course. So we start looking, and again, I used university as sort of the laboratory. So I had a student studying what would happen if we have very small cars instead of these big cars. Parking. 5 of these cars will occupy one place of parking. Mm-hmm. What would happen in the traffic for cities? Suddenly people would spend 1/3 less time to move from point A to point B. What would happen to air quality? So this study was very interesting because while we were developing the car, and to buy this is an American company because one key engineer was a former guy from an American company, and we are going to have American investment. It's actually an American company while we work in Portugal. But so we looked to the impact of having a very small vehicle on the different areas, and including environment. But we also looked to, and that was the role of this architect, the craziest ideas ever. So I think the crazy idea is the one I'm going to show, is this idea that, okay, we are not going to need cars, we are going to have services. Mm-hmm. And one service will be the car that will autonomous and pick you up. But even more, if you want to go to a bigger distance, why the hell it has to drive? So there will be a drone picking up the car and transporting it as a service. So there is this new... So when you imagine that, well, I think we are better to check with the real guys that know about this stuff. And, it was funny because we met this great Portuguese engineer that was part of the Formula One team of McLaren and said, do you can do this? And he said, yeah, with 40 million, you will do it, and we are in a way
40
of
million.
Yeah, 40 million, yeah, 40. And
I thought you said billion.
No, not a billion, no, 40 million. It's not, I know that in American terms is nothing. Yeah. In Portugal is a lot of money, but we will get it, and so I really think transportation is, it's really crazy. I live in a neighborhood where there are no parking spots. I don't think people even use their cars anymore. They just park it there. And, the traffic is horrible. I really think that that's an area that has to change. Mm-hmm. And I really think this idea of the autonomous cars, I think one of the most important things is that we are not going to need to have your own car. And I'm not even talking about public transportation. You are not going to need, the car will pick you up. You are not going to need parking in your house or building. And that's one change. But the other change that we are trying to is also on the size of the vehicle. We have tanks to protect ourselves from accidents. Mm-hmm. It's all crazy, and it's, so I really think, of course, the public transportation makes a lot of sense in many areas, but we are very, very much convinced that there will be a change in mobility, and we want to be an agent of change. And I'm very proud of being of Tuga Innovation. So the name is also funny because this architect is sort of provokes you, because Tuga is like a derogatory name for a Portuguese. If you want to, there are lots of jokes in Brazil about Portuguese. We are stupid, provincial, and so forth. And the name is Tuga, is a Tuga. So we decided to adopt that derogatory name for Portuguese, like a product. Our brand. I'm part of an initiative called Seixal Creative. Seixal is a city, is an area, a municipality close to Lisbon, which is very young, very diverse. People come from everywhere. So the municipality challenged us to bring the frontier to high school students. Mm-hmm. So we designed an educational program where, you have, of course, they have to have the foundations of different areas, but then they create their own projects. Very young, 15, 16. Mm-hmm. And the projects that are emerging are fantastic. And I really think from that experience, I imagine if all the municipalities did that all over the world, this would be a completely different world. I always thought that education, creativity would be a very fundamental component of education. But I never imagined, and this is sort of a learning process for me also, that they can be so young, and it will be so important for them to become creative at that age. And if I look to the education of the future, and I've been part also again of the very, very different areas. I think probably the best country in the world right now in education is Finland, which Finland, not only in education for the young, but for everyone in the society, they have this AI program for everyone. But they have also something that was very important, which was with the parliament, they look to what's going to happen in science and technology in 2037. And that will influence everyone. And so there is two components that are very important. One is the knowledge. You have to have the fundamentals. You have to know what's happening. The other one is that how you are going to be part of the future, how you are going to be a creator. And basically we encapsulate that in a much smaller program in this project at Seixal. And I really think that is the effort that almost every country has to do. It's a very important country. So the importance of knowledge is unbelievable. I come from a country that in 1548 killed knowledge through the Inquisition. Mm-hmm. And there is a famous, now famous, or at least in certain circles, document written by someone that told, the kings and the court of what will happen if we didn't have knowledge. And, and he gave practical examples from the time, but also looking to the future. And he was persecuted by the Inquisition. The Inquisition took over for like 300 years. and we became the poorest country in Western Europe. We only created a knowledge infrastructure after the revolution, in 87, 90, 99. And if you looked back to these 35 years, the difference is amazing. But even so, it's like the first generation, because I also think that knowledge is sort of the basic game that enables you to develop like the games on top of the game. Knowledge is the one that enables you then to develop the platforms, the products, and then on top of that, everything that is required for people to use it, the marketing and so forth. So there is this very interesting documentary on Netflix about basketball. So if basketball is the game, the NBA is the game on top of the game. Mm-hmm. And societies need both the game and the game on top of the game in almost any field. And Portugal started by destroying the game, in 1548. So we didn't have the game or the game on top of the game. And then finally, we developed the game, and now we are learning the game on top of the game. And I really think that is sort of a metaphor for what countries should do. It's knowledge is unbelievably important, and it's a basic, it's a foundation of everything. And we know in Portugal the tremendous cost of not having it.
Thank you, Antonio. I think you mentioned your vision for the Internet of Nature. And also, it's I think that will have, of course, you also talk about urban mobility. And I feel they are somehow consistent. Internet of Nature is not only about, of course, you started with the farmers' request, their need. But I think the vision certainly, extends beyond, agriculture in every aspect of our life and our society. That's one thing. Of course, you talk about education, and one thing I really like, at the end you talk about, the game on top of the game.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to interpret. Let me see if I can interpret that correctly. I think that relates to my next question. Right, you have this vision for Internet of Nature, and I can see, when you share that vision, many people definitely aspire for that vision to become true. And then, what do you see as the major barriers?
Well, to develop something of that magnitude, of course there are barriers. First of all, but I prefer to look at the barriers as an incentive to overcome them. Mm-hmm. And I believe you can overcome any barrier, with, of course, the overall vision that has to be shared by many people, and that seminar goes along those lines. There are lots of people that have to share that vision at different levels, but then we have to go and move forward. Mm-hmm. And I really think that the way to do it is to do sort of projects that have an outcome that is a visible outcome. Mm-hmm. And that outcome, I call it agent, but it can be anything else. And has to have, in the end, talking about the game on top of the game, has to have some sort of a compensation. It has to be a revenue layer, or has to be an improvement for the health of ecosystems and so forth. So it has to be goal-oriented. So I see it in a way that and that's the advantage of these logic of agents. I see it like a series of agents that have to work together, and those agents are developed by humans with the help of machines, with the overall goal to of course, and it's important to refer this. Nature is the largest market in the world. Mm-hmm. It's 9 trillion. Of those, 90% are for agriculture and extractive industries. But I see that the share of the other areas, like the offsets, like related to carbon removal or related to biodiversity or water or mobility or other areas that are not as intuitive. For instance, the movie industry uses nature all the time. Mm-hmm. The gaming industry uses. So if you look at that, I see the Internet of Nature as something that has to have a shared vision, mm-hmm. has to have a practical development in terms of tools, mm-hmm. agents or robots, and all of them have to have some sort of a goal, overall goal, and that can be financial, but not only financial, and that's a driving force, and that I really think it's the beauty of the Internet of Nature. People understand, mm-hmm. This is and I have to praise Nadina to come with such a fortunate name. I really think people understand this is the Internet to benefit nature, but mm-hmm. also humans, with the help of machines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's. I think that's very nice. So you talk about. I really like kind of using overcoming barrier as incentive.
Yeah. To
overcome the barrier. I think that's really a very nice attitude, because I think through that process, and you test you get a taste of winning over or overcoming, right? All those things. So António, I think Pete mentioned earlier, and I think there is some. So now, if we look in a holistic way, right, your professional tennis player career, your academic.
I was a tennis player that was somehow professional, but anyway.
Yeah, but tennis player, yeah. And then academic researcher, and now entrepreneur. What is consistent?
What remains
consistent?
It's very different when you are young and you are in sports. So that was great for me to grow up, but I really think the difference between being an academic and entrepreneur is that to be an academic is much better. Mm-hmm. I was an entrepreneur because I realized that I had to be, not because I really wanted to be mm-hmm. or I enjoy it to be. I realized that to help and to be honest, the very practical reason I became an entrepreneur was because the university was very bureaucratic in Portugal. Didn't allow me to expand the way I wanted. And on the other hand, I had lots of PhD students that I wanted to keep in Portugal and have jobs. That's why I was never an aspiration. I would be probably very happy to be a professor all my life. It was sort of a unforeseen accident. When I started being an entrepreneur, I realized that is something that is very important for a country like Portugal. Fred Smith, from Federal Express, once said that when you look to the success of US, you have to look to the guys that created things that no one believed that people wanted, mm-hmm. And that became huge companies. So I really think entrepreneurs are unbelievably important for a society. And one of my, and the only thing that is consistent now in this phase of my life is that I want to be a professor for the entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. Because I learned a lot being an entrepreneur, failures and successes and ups and downs. And one of the things that we want to convert Y-Dreams also, and we call it the Y-Dreams Factory, is some sort of a factory for the new entrepreneurs where my role and others will be to teach them on how to overcome, failure, how to become successful and so forth. But the overall theme of my life, is that there is one day I invited the mayor of Austin to talk to the mayors of. I was the director of a program between Portugal and UT Austin, so I invited the mayor of Austin to talk to all the mayors in Portugal, and share with them what was the strategy for Austin to become, an attractive city. And he had just one word: fun. My whole strategy is to have fun, and that's I like that. You have to have fun. If you have fun, you are going to enjoy anything you do in life. And fun will let you overcome the barriers. The pursuit of fun, and I think he was very right. And he doesn't know, but his name was William Wynne, and he was very influential because there are lots of mayors in the middle of Portugal that suddenly, my city can become fun. So there is this guy, probably the most successful, in a small town named Óbidos, decided to do a festival of chocolate without making any chocolate, but he did. So I really think that is sort of the common denominator is fun. Fun is if you don't have fun on what you do, it's sad. How do we bring fun to bare boring jobs? One of the things that is missing in many of the analyses of technology now is the impact that glasses, augmented reality glasses mostly, are going to have. They are going to change everything. And we have been working for a long time. I mean, there are 65 manufacturers of AR, VR glasses, mm-hmm. most of Americans or Chinese, none from Europe. The ones that were in Europe were bought. And I really think they are going to change everything. But one of the things that will change for the good is those professions. So we work with a supermarket, with a clerk on the supermarket. The power that you'll have with glasses and what you'll be able to do is amazing. It will be a complete transformation because she'll help the inventory, will help to look to the invisible, making visible, and create a world of data that she creates by just walking there. I mean, it could be a robot, but as a person, she can decide. I'm going to show the work of two students that are really bright, Francisca Cunha and Sofia Almeida. So she came up with this idea, is that they read somewhere that by the registration plate of the car, you can have the emissions. Mm-hmm. So they said, well, if we have the emissions of that car and we have the air pollution models, we can model the plume. How about coloring it for the glasses of augmented reality? Uh-huh. So suddenly you are with the glasses of augmented reality and you see all the pollution from the different vehicles.
So see all the microplastics.
Yeah, you can see, making visible what is invisible. Yeah. And that was a great idea. And I'm going to show what they've done because it's fantastic. Actually, the two innovations adopted that, because that's what we want to prove, is that our vehicle, like Tuga, which is electrical and so forth, are not going to have that impact. But that I really think glasses are going to have a huge, huge impact. Mm-hmm. And that's just an example. There are many others, that we think will happen, and I don't think people are counting on that. And Internet of Nature will be one. One exercise we did also was, you walk through the cities and you see the trees. Mm-hmm. A tree is so important, reduces air pollution, reduces noise, reduces the temperature, so if people one day with glasses will walk through the cities and will see the role of the trees, they'll have a completely different vision of life. I think that by revealing the what is invisible will have a huge, huge impact on how people will feel. And I think from an environmental standpoint, I think that will be very convincing, and also a way to change behavior.
So, António, I know our time is up, but I really appreciate your final answer to my, because I was asking, what was consistent through all your careers, and I got one answer, which is fun.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you, because it is that, you did not plan your career. Right, and you basically actually you were, I think, Pete, you mentioned earlier, and I think Antonio is a dreamer. You keep dreaming, and then when you said that entrepreneurship, it was not planned. It was because you want to keep your PhD student in Portugal, and you're trying to solve those problems, and then somehow you got on the boat of entrepreneurship. But through all this whole process, and I feel that you were having fun and dreaming and finding solutions. And then even the final note, you talk about this VR or AR enabled glasses, and you want to make the invisibles visible. And the reason you wanted to do that, because you want people to see that they did not see before.
Yeah.
And the reason you want them to see, because you want to change them. You want them to change their mind towards a better world. Because a lot of time nowadays, you talk about, pollution coming from a tailpipe and all these trees. People, when you and I, we want to walk on the street, we see the trees, but we really did not see them. And from this AR, VR, of course, Internet of Nature enabled, and all this knowledge and this scientific-based information that gets to every person's mind. And then, because I feel that all your vision, while we can't develop AR and VR technologies, we can't develop all these databases behind it.
Yeah.
But I feel in the end, for this to really become reality, and I feel it's going to be, you have to change people. And to change people, you have to inform them, to let them see it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I think our time is up. I think this is so great. And thank you for sharing your career.
No, it was my pleasure. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yeah. And Jacob,
very glad to be back at Cornell.